Sister Carrie Berner, the one I told you that I interviewed last week. Pope John Paul I was murdered 33 days after becoming Pope and by the Jesuits, by the way, because the night before he died, he made some phone calls and he wanted to uncover the sexual abuse problem and make it public. He wanted to become transparent, and of course, they couldn't let that go. The Jesuits are the power branch of the Vatican, and guess what? The very first Jesuit Pope is who? The one we have right now, who says the United States should not be focusing on building walls. They should be opening bridges. But if you go to the Vatican, and I have been there many times, you'll see one of the biggest walls in the world. So, the hypocrisy.
Yeah, let me help the Christians out with the wall thing, because there's a lot of controversy. You got a lot of big time evangelical leaders that are saying, "Oh, that's not Christian-like. You can't have a wall." So let me put this in a way where everyone will understand this. Heaven's got a wall, heaven's got a gate, and it takes extreme vetting to get into heaven. So what is the problem? It is biblical. Walls are biblical. Without walls, you don't have a border. Without borders, you don't have a country.
And without a door or a wall in your house, you have no security. So all these people that want an open wall, and again, I always tell them, please, and I have been there, go all the way down to the south of Mexico, the border between Guatemala and Mexico, and stand there for a minute, cross the border, try to come back to see what happens to you. All these immigrants that come this way are treated with dignity. This notion that the parents are being separated, this is, folks, a lot of people are sending their children by themselves because they know they're going to keep them, and then they'll deal with it. But this notion that we shouldn't have any immigration laws or that we should eradicate ICE, this is ridiculous. What kind of country do we have? Why don't they just say it out loud? We want a one world government without borders and purely socialistic, where everyone is going to be equally miserable. Why don't they just say it? That's what they want.
Right, and you're seeing that taking place in Europe right now. I mean, they're overrunning those countries. I mean, Paris, downtown Paris, I've seen pictures.
Yes.
It's like a third world country, which was a beautiful city.
Yeah.
So, they're trying to instill that here. It's not going to work. It's not happening. God's stepping in. He's turning things around, but it's going to get a little tense before it gets better. I can tell you that right now.
Your vision about D-Day. Once again, let me just step back here for a moment. Of course, when I think D-Day, I think of our brave men who gave their lives. The average age was 23, I believe.
Right.
Now, when you see an average 23 these days, and no offense, because we have a lot of good listeners is not what I'm about to say. We've heard of snowflakes and cupcakes. Right. Why do you think that's happening? This is obviously orchestrated. They don't want real men to be men until they're 50?
Right. Exactly. And you're seeing the maturity level of these kids now. Back in World War II, in that era, I mean, you had women that were getting married at 16, 17 years old. Now everybody's going to think, okay, you're a pedophile. No, it was the way it was back then, because the maturity level of a 16-year-old was already married, having kids, and taking care of her family. And so, again, you take a 26-year-old in today's time, and it's like, sometimes, I'm not saying all of them, but sometimes they can have the maturity level of a 16-year-old in today's time, So, but it was designed that way. It's the dumbing down of our society right now through GMOs, through the chemicals in the foods. The testosterone level for men, the acceptable level, was way higher in World War II than what it is today. If you do a blood work and you go to get your testosterone levels done, like I've done many times, every male's done it, and they tell you, okay, well, you're sitting at 700, so that's normal. Well, no, it's not, because in World War II, it was a lot higher than that. They want you dumbed down. They want you this more feminine. They don't see. Also, men are supposed to have a fighting spirit, and this is why you see a lot of guys with the spirit of cowardice on them, is because of low testosterone or all this stuff. There's so many different components we could talk about that's causing this, but that's just one of 100, basically, that's meant to do this to our society.
But they're enabling it. I remember back in the day, it was not about political correctness. It was about what was morally correct. But now everything you say offends somebody. And if you offend them, you have to find a safe space for them, give them a teddy bear. What is this getting to?
Yeah, it's just, again, I think it's just going to take turning society around, red pilling these people, basically, and letting them see the truth for themselves. And once they see the truth, I think those whatever spirit that is that's on them will come off, basically, because the spirit of revelation is usually what sets people free a lot of times. So, I mean, once that revelation kicks in, that, hey, this is not what this is about, this is why they don't want you having a home church, or they don't want you having a home school. They want you in a public school or in a church system. Why? Because they control it. It's all about control. And it's all about when you're in a home church, they can't control you. When you're in a home school, they can't indoctrinate your kids. When a pastor goes to seminary or whatever now, they're not teaching these guys. They're indoctrinating them. Period. So, churches were never meant to be a business. They're all incorporated. Every single one of them. So now, Jesus is not the head of your ministry when you do that. The state is. You answer to the state. You've cut the head off of the Lord when you do that. Now you pile on being a 501c3. Now you just went in covenant with Baal. Period. Because you're under the Baal system. And that was one of the goals of this whole takeover of America, was to silence the Christians. Period. And what they were going to do under the 501c3, which they can legally do, by the way, they can say, you're going to preach transgender or homosexuality from the pulpit, or we're going to shut you down. And they can legally do it under the 501c3 because you answer to the federal government.
You have a full chapter on this, by the way. Can you discuss more of I wanted to leave this till the end, but since you're bringing it up, discuss the Johnson Amendment and the 501, the C3 tax-exempt organizations, because I believe churches were tax-exempt before,
yes.
But people have this misconception. Please explain.
Okay, they were already exempt under the Constitution, and what happened was, in 1954, Johnson's name was on it. Okay, but this guy was a 33rd degree Mason. He was not smart enough to devise this plan. It took a think tank, which, by the way, it's not well known that 1954 was also the same year that the Bilderbergs was established. Imagine that. There's no coincidences. So they devised this plan that we will give you an extra tax credit or tax benefit that when people give to your church, they can deduct it off their taxes. Well, they're already exempt. They didn't need that. But in return, we're going to give you this, but you have to keep your mouth shut on political issues. You cannot speak out from the pulpit on political issues.
Why did they accept, though? Why did they accept the morphing into something new?
Because they knew, even the Bible says, in the end times, these pastors will become dirty, filthy lucres. And it's all about the money. They know people are more apt to give knowing that they will get a tax return at the end of the year. When they don't understand that when you're sowing into that system, you're sowing into the Baal system, period. It's a covenant with Baal. It's a covenant with the federal government. Again, you're not in control. The government is. And because I'll give you a prime example of why. If you try to get out of the 501c3, it's like joining the mafia. You never get out. So they made it so hard that you will lose your assets. You will lose all your money in order to come out of that 501c3. That shows you that it's demonic right there, that the enemy has entrapped you in this. And the other thing is, I talk about this a lot, where the patient is the enemy. The devil's very, very, very patient. Okay, so 1954, we signed this thing called the 501c3. We get extra money for that 30 pieces of silver. We have to keep our mouth shut. 10 years after we had enough churches underneath that 501c3 status, because prior to that, they were flowing in power and authority. They were getting mad about it, exposing some of these corrupt politicians. They wanted to get rid of the church. So they did it through the 501c3. So 10 years after that, they go the first step. They take prayer out of schools. Where was the church? Silent. They didn't say a word. They couldn't, because they took that 30 pieces of silver. Enemy waits 10 years after that. The big one, Roe versus Wade, passes. Where was the church? Silent. They couldn't say anything. So everybody says, oh, America's under judgment because the blood of those babies are on their hands. No, it's not, folks. The church is the moral and spiritual compass of any country, period. The blood of those babies is on the church's hands. That is blood money that they are taking. These guys that are living like rock stars in these 18,000 square foot homes, I hate to tell you, that's blood money.
That was my next question. All these people that have multi-million-dollar homes and they drive multiple Ferraris and they're the pastor of the church. I'm sorry, something's wrong with that.
Well, again, they're not the pastor. You got to remember, they're the CEO
right.
of a corporation. And this is why the church has not been flowing in power and authority. You want to know why America's in the shape that it's in? Why the entire earth is in the shape that it's in? Because the church hasn't done its job. They don't have the power and authority. They've been corrupted. They're in with the world. They're in with the system. This is what's under judgment right now. So they're under the Baal system. So they've got to come out of it. And when President Trump gave them all he did was give them their voice back. That's all he did. And he didn't take away the 501c3. And what people have to understand is that they've got to come out of it completely. They have to. And see, what they're saying is that God cannot meet my needs. The spirit of mammon is going to meet my needs, which is why they're in it. So they know that if people, they know the heart of a person basically is if they don't get a tax write-off, they're less apt to give. Well, if you're giving to get a tax write-off, you're not giving with the right heart anyway. It's not about getting something in return. Yes, God has sowing and reaping. You will receive something in return, but you allow God to do that. You're expecting a tax return thinking, oh, God blessed me with a tax return. No, he didn't. The devil did. Baal did, because you're in covenant with him. Don't think for 1 second that the devil's not going to take care of his people as well. Don't think for 1 second he's not going to drop breadcrumbs in front of you thinking that you've been giving and giving and giving. Now you're going to receive this huge blessing, but because you've been giving and giving into an ungodly system. Now here's where the other thing comes in. The end-time transfer of wealth. And this is where people don't understand, is that how can God transfer, the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the just, the Bible says. So if God's going to transfer the wealth of the wicked, which is what you're seeing happen right now, that's getting taken away from them. Notice that Donald Trump signed that executive order. He can confiscate assets, monies, all this stuff. See, again, it's with the wealth of the wicked now, it's got to go somewhere. It's got to go into the hands of the righteous. But how can God give it to the righteous from one ungodly system and put it right back in the same system again? He can't. So if you're part of the system, I tell people you need to get out of the system, because the Bible says that cursed is he who takes a bribe for the slaying of the innocent. The church took a bribe. So the church is under a curse. You want to know why all this stuff is going on in the churches? It's because they're under a curse. They took a bribe. The Bible says, it talks about, when you take a bribe, it blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. You want to know why they're blind and can't see what they're doing? Because they took a bribe. You know why their words are perverted? Because they took a bribe. This is why all this is going on in the churches. So that explains what's going on in our churches across the land. And there's other countries that have systems like the 501c3. They just don't call it that. It's called something different. I know Canada, I think's one. England's another. I think there's probably a couple of others out there. But that's what's going on with the churches right now.
Well,